I am so excited to announce that iDriveAClassic is now sponsored by Adrian Flux, one of the UK's leading classic car insurers. If you're looking for classic car insurance, I've popped a link to Adrian Flux in the description box below. Hi guys, it's Steph from iDriveAClassic, and today I'm back with this Talbot Solara Rapier. Now the test today is going to be slightly different because I didn't plan for this one. So I came to see Simon to test the Ford Mark I Escort Estate, and he said, whilst you're here, I've also got this amazing Talbot. Do you want to have a look? Now when I did a bit of digging online, there are less than 10 Talbot Solaras left, and I thought, well, what a waste of an opportunity it would be not to include it. However, there's one drawback. Because this is a barn find that only came out of the barn like a week or so ago, it doesn't currently have an MOT, and it's going to be used in film work, which means that it won't ever be put back on the road officially. It'll just be trailered around. So in today's video, we're going to do a bit of a walk around and start it up, but we aren't going to have the drive section. So I wanted to show you, what can you actually find that's a real barn find nowadays? Well, let's have a look at this Talbot Solara and find out. Today's review falls into that trap. You either think this is a classic car or you think it's a load of rubbish, which deserves to be used, scrapped and forgotten about. Personally, it's a little bit modern for me, but with it being such a rare car, I decided it deserved a spot on iDriveAClassic. Now, before we kick off talking about the car, let's discuss what Talbot was all about. So Talbot launched in 1903 as Clement Talbot, but after a year they went with the name of just Talbot, which were a company in London assembling the components of the French Clement-Bayard cars. It existed until 1934 when it had a financial collapse, at which point it was bought out by Rootes, and then it was sold on to Simca, who were then bought out by Chrysler Europe in 1970. It was all then packaged up by Chrysler when they sold their marks onto PSA Peugeot Citroën in 1978, which then put the name back into use, and they decided it would be going on any cars formerly badged Chrysler in the UK after the 1st of August 1979, which then meant that the last of the Avengers got badged up as Talbot until 1981 when production ended. And with that, the Talbot Solara was launched in the UK in 1980. But if you're watching from France, you might know this as the Simca 1510. It was essentially brought to market to fight for the space in the UK in that fleet and travelling salesman marketplace, hence why it's a little bit sensible and it's got that saloon finish. And it was also drafted in to replace the, in my opinion, far more stylish Hillman Avenger. So let's talk about where this all came from, because first of all we need to discuss the Chrysler Alpine. So the Chrysler Alpine was very popular in the 70s, and in fact at one point was the European Car of the Year, and it had been sold with the 1.3, 1.4 and 1.6 engine types, and it had a fastback coupe styling. But as time wore on, it started to look a bit dated, so they jazzed it up and they decided to do a bit of a split. So they then launched the facelift Talbot Alpine, which replaced that Chrysler Alpine, and then they launched the Talbot Solara. So essentially that Talbot Alpine kept that fastback styling, and then for that customer that they wanted to hit, they launched the Solara. Now the Solara had of course the saloon back and the Alpine had the fastback, so it's a little bit, but very interestingly they decided to only go with the two engine types on the Solara of the 1.3 and 1.6, so a little bit of a loss there. Now I like a few facts in a video, and it's also worth mentioning at this point that the designer of the Alpine, which then of course influenced the Solara and the facelift Alpine, was none other than Roy Axe. Now he'd started at Chrysler and he'd worked on things like the Sunbeam Rapier and the Hillman Hunter. But then, of course, if you're a BL fan, you'll probably know him because he moved over to Rover in the 1980s, and he designed both the 800 and the 200-400 series, and he was also jointly involved in the design of the Montego. So it really was a designer with some clout. Now, as we aren't able to take this car out for a drive today, I did a bit of digging for some specs. So of course, as I've already mentioned, they were only available in the UK market as a 1.3 and a 1.6 petrol engine. Now on your 1.3, you would have expected 0 to 60 in around 14.6 seconds and a top speed of 96 miles per hour. Now your 1.6 would have performed above this, but sadly I couldn't find a really reliable reference to give you a precise figure on this. Now, because of course Talbot weren't a dominant market name, the salesmen and buying public already had a firm idea of which car manufacturers they liked, and it meant that although the Solara was kind of successful, the Cavalier and the Cortina really held their market share. And that's without me mentioning that both Ford and GM offered far more choice for the discerning buyer than just two engine options. And in my opinion, massive opportunities were missed for the Solara by deciding not to go for a 2-litre or above engine, because it meant that you're trying to win over people that are already married up to brands, maybe first or second generation in their family, and you're not even giving them the engine option that they want. So it's not really a surprise that the car didn't perform as well as it should have. And with that, it leads me nicely on to talk to you about the Solara Rapier. So as the 1980s marched on, the team at Chrysler realised that the Solara was being thrashed by the competition, which included the Ford Sierra, which had launched in 1982. So with that, they thought, let's come up with a few special editions to try and revive some interest, which then led to the launch of the Solara Minx, the Rapier and the Spectre. Now the naming conventions were simply down to trim level, and the Rapier was top level trim available. Now sadly, despite healthy early sales of the Talbot marques, and in fact they were only beaten by, I think, Ford and BL in 1979 when they came to market, the Talbot name just didn't make it. So the name was quietly shelved in the mid-80s and stopped being used on new cars in 1987, and it finished being used on cars completely when the Horizon stopped production. However, it is worth noting that the Talbot Express vans were being made until 1994, so officially the marque didn't cease to exist until that point. Now we've had a bit of a look around the car and I've told you a little bit about Talbot and the car itself. Now let's meet Simon, because he's a very interesting man who dug up this relic from a garage in Lincolnshire and intends to bring it to a small screen near you.
Hi, I'm Simon. I've recently rescued this Talbot Solara. It's been stood for 12 years. I was told about it in a garage where it was. I winched it out. I've put new fuel lines on it, a new battery on it, and just gone through it all. And it's hopefully going to end up on your TV screen sometime soon as an extra. So we shall see.
A Talbot Solara wasn't an uncommon sight in the 80s through to the 90s, but nowadays, with less than 10 on the road, you're not going to be spotting one in your average high street, and it's going to be even harder to acquire one. So it's fantastic stuff that not only is this being taken on by somebody, it's going to be preserved for people to see in the future and future audiences, which isn't usually how I feel about classic cars, but something this rare, I think it's a fantastic use of the car. And I think if this was put into daily use with those little bits of rust here and there, I think that it would quickly disintegrate. It'd probably only take, a couple of heavy winters, and this would be beyond the point of repair. Now I wanted to show you what we had on offer inside the car. So over here we've got our glove box, and as we come down we've got our parcel shelf. So there's lots of storage in the car, which is always a big plus point, because in some 80s cars you really end up with nothing at all. And another thing that I really like about this is that your heater vents, as you can see here, and plus points for the fact that the plastic is largely intact, can all be adjusted up to how you want them in that particular section. A very early form of how heating and cooling is done in cars nowadays. Now, as we come into the centre of the dash, we've got a very sparse layout. So as you can see in the centre there, we've got a digital clock, which seems to be working, and we've got our fog lights, we've got rear heated screen, we've got hazard warning lights, and then we've got our heater control pad there. We've got an ashtray with a cigar lighter, and as we come down here, we've got a cassette player as well. Now, something that I thought I would point out that while we're here that I think is very interesting to note is that this material that the dash is made from quite often gets cracks because they've used it, I think they used it on Montegos and stuff like that, and usually you do see cracks or splits in it, but because this has been indoors since 2008 and even before that it seems to have been seems to have lived in a garage because otherwise it wouldn't be this nice. It hasn't split. So again, it's just those little telltale signs that tell us that this is a car that perhaps hasn't had as much use as we think it had. Now, looking in front of us on the dash, and as we look, we've got temperature gauge, we've got our oil. By the way, you may notice when we start this up, the oil light comes on. Apparently there's a faulty sensor, but I mean, look, Simon's had this for what, a week or so? We can't expect it to be perfect. We've got a rev counter, speedo, fuel gauge, and we can see if our battery's charging there or not as well. So with the wipers, they're a little bit bizarre because I can't seem to get them to auto park. So I'm going to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So I would expect that to auto park itself. So I don't know if that's a fault in the car or that is a Talbot feature. I'm sure somebody in the comments section will tell me. Oh, we're a bit spoilt here with 5 gears. So we go up into first, down into second. You know, I preferred the other gearbox to this one. Up into third, into fourth, and we go right across up into fifth. Now to get into reverse, we've got this little lift thing here. So we're going to lift that, we push that across, and we go up into reverse. And then we come back into neutral. Now, as well as that, this is on choke and it still needs a little bit of fettling, so it doesn't sound the best. So I'm going to start this up so you can hear what she sounds like, and then we'll head through to the back so you can hear what she sounds like from the back as well. So it needs a little bit of... Do you know what? If I hadn't been started up since 2008 and I still sounded this good, I'd be pretty chuffed. It has been a real privilege to show you this car today. Now, it's a little bit different because we haven't been able to do our drive segment, but how often am I going to be offered a Talbot Solara Rapier? Well, seeing as there's only other one, if it's yours, let's get it on test and we'll take it out for a drive. But otherwise, we'll probably never get to test one of these again. And so I thought it's better to show you what I can show you because, of course, it being a film car, than of course not showing any of it to you at all, because I guess we all appreciate cars no matter what, even if we can't drive them, and I just thought it was so special I had to feature it on the channel. So I hope you've enjoyed this shorter than usual video today. It's been a real privilege to show you this as it was found, bar being washed of course and having some fresh petrol put in, and hopefully keep your eyes peeled and be coming to a TV show near you before you know it. Now, until next time, take care and drive safely.